Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome. I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today was born in Alaska and for many years has practiced law in Tokyo, representing technology companies from all over the world. For more than 10 years, he was the managing partner of the Tokyo office of his global law firm. He speaks, reads, and writes fluent Japanese, was an International Rotary Club scholar to Japan during high school, and graduated from International Christian University, a Japanese liberal arts college. He attended law school in New York City, where he practiced law for almost 16 years before relocating to Tokyo. He's an avid motorcyclist. In addition to riding motorcycles and writing, his other passion is saltwater fly fishing. Welcome to Authors Over 50, Mark Weeks.
Thank you, Julia. Great to be here.
Mark, our opening question on Authors Over 50 is always, what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, it's a really good question because I liked to write when I was growing up, and I entered several creative writing contests and won a couple. I think the greatest benefit to winning was getting out of school for 2 days to go to a workshop. But being in law school and later on practicing full time and with a family, it just I didn't seem to have the time for it. But at some point, actually around the age of 55, I realized if I don't write something now, I'm not going to get it done. So I decided I'd been playing around with some chapters and writing some different things, but I'd never committed to finishing a manuscript by a certain deadline, and so I decided to impose that deadline on myself, and sure enough, it worked.
I think a lot of us live and die by deadlines in our calendars, so that works for me as well. I'm always fascinated by the expats and the writers from other countries that I've interviewed. How did living in Japan for so many years influence your writing journey?
Was very fortunate for me because it provided so much material to work with, and because I had grown up in the U.S. in Idaho and also lived in New York for quite a while, it provided a great contrast between the U.S. and Japan, because they're completely different countries, different cultures, different histories. And as you know, Julia, New York is very different from almost everywhere else in the U.S. and quite different from Idaho, as I'm sure it is from Texas. But then you layer onto that the differences with Japan. It just provided so much material that I feel like I could have written three books.
Well, you can make a series and sequels and everything now.
I've heard that from a lot of readers, actually, that they're waiting for a sequel.
Yeah, that's so exciting when our readers want to hear more and want the story to continue.
Yeah, that is great, although I didn't plan it that way. But a lot of readers seem to think that it's set up well for a sequel. And in fact, one reviewer from Kirkus said they thought it would be a great beginning to a series, which is nice to hear.
It really is. And that's where they say we start earning money, is when we start writing those series.
Exactly. From a business standpoint, that seems to be where the money is, as you say. And that's true with both traditionally published authors and also indie authors. And but that's not why I wrote it. Perhaps I should have thought about the business plan a little bit more. It was just something that seemed very compelling to me at the time.
Well, once you wrote this book, how did you proceed? Did you search for an agent, decide to use a hybrid, a small press, or did you self-publish?
I wrote the first manuscript, and I knew next to nothing about creative writing, other than it was very different from legal writing. And I could spell, and I understood grammar, and I knew the difference between a sentence and a sentence fragment. But legal writing is very different from creative writing. So once I finished it, I consulted with a good friend of mine who's an author, Tucker Malarkey, who's written several books and had some real success. And she recommended that I have an editor look at it. So I did. I hired an editor, and that was sort of like going through a creative writing course. Actually, as you know, it's a very productive process, but also very painful. And so I ended up whittling the manuscript from 120,000 words to 100,000 words to 88,000 words, and eventually to where it is now at around 86,000 words. And then, so I worked with that developmental editor for quite a while, and then I hired a line editor. And after I had finished the developmental edits, I started querying. And I used Query Tracker, and I thought I'd just continue querying while I was working on my second book until I got an agent. But then I started meeting people who were indie published and had some real success with it. And they said, look, you can keep querying, but it may be 2 or 3 years out before you find an agent, and then then they have to find a publisher for you. So you could be another 2 years. So you got 4 years on top of that before you ever get published. Or you can just do it yourself. And so this one author who's published multiple legal thrillers, he introduced me to a project manager, and I ended up publishing myself. I set up a publisher to give it the patina of some legitimacy, and published through that publisher. And that actually turned out to be far more work, almost as much work as writing the first manuscript. As I'm sure you understand quite well. And then the marketing turned out to be far more time consuming than I thought it would be. But it's all good.
Well, I think that we writers would certainly rather be writing than promoting ourselves. So marketing is always so difficult for most of us. What have you found that worked or didn't work?
Well, that's a really good question. So people recommended that I start doing social media, which I started in 2020, and I fish a lot, as you mentioned. So I had a lot of material from fishing videos and photos. And I didn't do any social media before then, except for LinkedIn. LinkedIn was a client actually when they first started. And so I was one of their early members, but it's a static thing. It just, basically your bio sits there, and I didn't really post anything, but I started posting a lot, and so I'm now on several platforms, and I think that does help, but I don't know to what extent it actually helps. Book signings seem to be very helpful when you can connect with readers, and they actually buy your book, and you sign it for them, and then by word of mouth things spread. So that's time consuming, but very gratifying, and so I don't know if that's the best way to go, but it certainly has worked for me. I think some combination. It's like that old joke, that about the head of marketing at a corporation who said, I want to cut about half of my marketing budget because I don't think I need it, but I don't know which half. And it's kind of like that. It's like, well, can I really stop the social media? Probably not, is my guess.
I think it's very important these days, and we don't like it, but we have to do it.
Yeah. The thing is to stay on point, for me. So it's the fishing and then the writing. Stay with that. Try to avoid any discussions outside of that, because it could be a huge time suck and not productive. And you want to encourage everybody to read your book. You don't want to be I guess who was it? Michael Jordan said even conservatives buy my shoes or something like that. You just don't, there's no need to wade into anything that you think might be controversial, unless you're trying to appeal to a specific audience. But that's not my case.
They say that there's no bad publicity, but I certainly think that there is. I was in public relations and marketing for most of my careers, and I do think there is bad publicity that you can't come back from.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
And I think we all learn on that first novel. I think we learn our craft. We go through all that developmental editing and we kill our darlings. And there's so
Yes.
much that ends up on the cutting room floor. And
So
and
painful.
and then it is painful because you think these were some of my best paragraphs, and she wants me to slash all of these out of the
Yes.
out of the
Yes,
novels.
exactly. Exactly. My first chapter isn't even in the book. The first chapter I ever wrote, which, I wrote with such loving care. But yeah, you have to listen to those people, as painful as it is. I found that, like, with my developmental editor, the comments that were the most painful for me were the best comments, actually, in terms of creating something, that's better.
Yeah, that's tighter and that moves the story forward, I think,
Right.
is what they're trying to get us to do. But you
Right.
save all of those beautiful paragraphs that you wrote, because that might start your series.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Or you might be able to use it in another book. Or,
Yeah.
in fact, I just cribbed from something that I had slashed from Bottled Lightning for the novel I'm working on today. I just plugged it in yesterday. We'll see if it survives. But yeah, I keep all that stuff.
Well, how did you determine the plot of this book?
Oh wow. It was iterative. I had the idea for a character. It's very different from the novel I'm working on now, where I I see the end. I'm the middle is very blurry, but I definitely see the end. And well, there's an end, there's a climax, and then there's the wrap up. So I understand the wrap up. I still don't understand the climax, and the middle is a little bit blurry. But uh, for Bottled Lightning, I just had this idea for a character, and even the character morphed. The character was originally a white lawyer, American lawyer practicing in Japan. But my son is biracial, and so over time he morphed into a biracial character, and then his client morphed into a biracial character. And I didn't even know what tech. I knew I wanted to write about some cutting edge technology, because our law firm does a lot of technology work. But I didn't even know what technology was going to be. And then I was fishing in the Florida Everglades, and we got overtaken by a thunderstorm, and we're lying on the bottom of a skiff, and these lightning bolts were dropping all around us. And I thought, wow, there's a lot of energy in those lightning bolts. If there was some way to generate that on demand. And that's how I came up with the idea for Saya's invention, where she invented this way of generating lightning on demand. And the interesting thing about it was, science knows the theory about how lightning is generated, but they don't know the actual mechanics. So that gave me an area to work with. And she figured out the actual mechanics, and then she figured out how to replicate it. But then I thought, well, okay, then who's the antagonist, and why? And so it was one wall after another that I had to sort of climb over. And there were some false starts. I ended up ditching some ideas, and you know how it works. You write it and you think, well, this doesn't really work. And so you come up with something else.
Well, that's a fascinating premise. I look forward to reading it.
Oh, well, thank you. It's topical. I didn't write it with the idea of it being topical, but it's become very topical.
Yes. Especially here in Texas, where we live through major droughts, and we worry about the water table, and we worry about, the aquifers, and are we going to have enough water? We feel like there are a million of us who are sticking our straws into the same milkshake.
It's the same thing in southern Idaho. The Boise, that Treasure Valley area, it's all high plains desert. It's all, irrigation, the farming and the cattle industry. We're all taking out of the same reservoirs and the same aquifers. It's the exact same issue, I think, over a lot of the West, except for, perhaps the Pacific Northwest.
Well, Mark, tell us a little bit more about the passages that you've brought to share today, and then read from it so that we can hear your tone and voice in the book.
Sure. So I decided to read from the first chapter. There it was. I really had to think about what I wanted to read because there are so many passages that I still vividly remember. But the book starts out with Torn, who's a technology lawyer. As you mentioned, he's the head of the Tokyo office of a global law firm, and he has this client, Saya, who is a serial entrepreneur. So this is not her first rodeo. She's worked at other startups before, and she sold one of them and took the proceeds from that sale and started this new business called Naijin Clean, which is named after the Japanese god of thunder, to develop her idea for lightning on demand, which then can be stored in batteries. And so she knows that Torn likes to ride motorcycles, and he came to a meeting, rode his motorcycle to a meeting, and she was supposed to go meet with investors after the meeting. And she surprises Torn in the parking lot and says, "Hey, why don't you take me for a ride and drive me over to the hotel where I'm going to be meeting with the investors?" And he's kind of surprised by this, and it's kind of odd for him to be taking a client on a motorcycle, but he says, "Okay, I'll give you a ride." So they get on the expressway, and it should be an uneventful ride, but they are surprised. So let me just start in the middle of the action, so to speak. The big Mercedes changed lanes, slowing down in the middle lane until it was parallel with them. The tinted rear window opened. Before Torn could react, a man stuck a gun out of the window and fired. The bullet passed through the soft padding under Saya, exiting the other side of her seat. With well-practiced fluidity, Torn squeezed the left handlebar lever to open the clutch and shifted down to fourth gear with his left foot, then throttled up with his right hand while releasing the clutch lever with his left. The Beamer raced away from the Mercedes. He shifted back to fifth gear as the RPM shot up. "Holy shit," Saya exclaimed, tightening her hold even more. "Are you hit?" Torn asked her as calmly as he could. He'd broken into a cold sweat. "I don't think so. Thank God," he replied, wondering what the hell was just happened. Things moved in slow motion. Torn thought, no one has a gun in Japan except yaks. He was relieved neither of them had been hit, scared shitless about being chased by Yakuza types, and pissed off at the damage to his motorcycle. The car again appeared next to them in the center lane. Torn slammed on the brakes with his right hand and foot, letting the Mercedes fly by. He shifted down 2 gears to third and throttled up, accelerating to 120 so fast he almost popped a wheelie. He flew by the driver's side of the car, the high RPMs making the bike's engine scream. Shifting up to fourth gear, he rocketed to 160. The powerful car caught him quickly. He sped up to 180, but the big Mercedes stayed on them. They approached more traffic, forcing both vehicles to slow down. As they reached the Mitaka Highway bus terminal, the 3 lanes of traffic became 2, creating a traffic jam. Salvation. Torn threaded between the 2 lanes of stalled traffic. Their pursuer briefly flanked them on the left shoulder until being thwarted by a wall built to protect surrounding homes from expressway noise. They were safe, but only for a moment. He heard a motorcycle engine being revved to the ugly, deafening sound of a bike with its muffler removed. At the same time, he saw the blinding light of a single high beam behind him and heard loud death metal music. His heart sank. Things don't get better for them from there. But the expressways in Japan are very well maintained. And first of all, Japan is a great country to drive motorcycles in. By the way, those numbers are in kilometers, not miles. So driving in a motorcycle in Japan is really a pleasure, and cars are trained to look out for motorcycles, and they understand the motorcycle's lane split, so it's not an issue. So typically things are very peaceful, and it's just a wonderful experience to ride a motorcycle in Japan. And so that experience is turned upside down by what's transpiring there.
Yes, you threw us right into the action. I could picture all of that. And
Oh, great.
I
That's
love
wonderful.
hearing about the difference in the cultures too, because knowing that Japan doesn't have many guns is also intriguing for those of us who are so accustomed to everybody having a gun in this country.
Well, and it's an interesting. I talk to people about this from time to time, but historically the development is very different because Japan, the central government, it's kind of a long story, but they outlawed gun possession right around 1600. And so they've had 400 years of gun control. So people are just not used to having guns. There are people, and I know people who are avid hunters in Japan, and they have rifles or shotguns, but that's very tightly controlled, including the amount of ammunition they can have and the training they have to get. So that's just, the way it's been for centuries. And as you know, obviously the US is completely different. So when people say, well, why can't we have what they have in Japan? Well, you'd have to completely undo the fabric of the culture to get to that point. And that would be a real struggle, in my view.
Absolutely. Mark, do you Google yourself or read reviews? And if so, how do you deal with the bad or the good ones?
Well, the good ones, if I can, I respond with a heartfelt thank you. The bad ones, knock on wood, there haven't been very many, but the ones on there's on Amazon, it's from 2 up to 5. And luckily it's hanging in there at 4.5 stars, which I'm very happy about. So about 62% are 5-star reviews. And there's only a few 2s and 3s, but they just put stars. They don't write anything. So that's kind of frustrating because I would like to know, what their concerns are. But you can't please everybody, and you can't write for everybody, and there's just no way to do that, and it's very subjective, and not everybody is going to get it, so to speak. I think that for my book, it's definitely meant for mature audiences, and meaning I think you have to have lived for a while to understand what's going on with the characters. On the other hand, a Gen Zer, expressed her love for the book. So obviously she's 25 and she got it, and she loved the main character, and he's flawed. But it's been interesting. There's some romance scenes, very light. There's only a couple actually. And I've had some people say, is that really necessary for a thriller? And then mostly women, interestingly enough, say, well, I wish there was more of that in the book. And maybe those people are fans of romance. I don't know. But it's just sort of all over the place. And it's all good. I love the feedback, particularly where somebody has a particular, reason for liking or disliking or whatever, instead of just, trolling. Yeah. Which doesn't happen very often, actually. But I love the comments from people about the ending, for example, where they say they love it. It totally makes sense. And other people have this reaction of where they're angry about it, and you need to write a sequel and fix it. And those are all great too. I mean, it's much better than, well, it was all right. I'd much rather trigger a strong emotional response one way or another.
Absolutely. And that shows that they loved your story and that they were drawn in. And I love constructive criticism. But if somebody gives me a 1 star because they didn't like the way the book felt in their hand, or they didn't complete the book, or, that's what drives you crazy. But they say that those 2 and 3 stars we need, because nobody's going to believe that everybody's going to give 5 stars to anything. So it makes it seem like we're not having just bots.
Yeah, it's definitely more realistic. And I've had some 4 stars that were extremely well written. And one of them, I still think about from time to time. And she and her criticism, I understand where she's coming from. Of course, I have a different perspective, but I absolutely understand where she's coming from. And the effort to put in a multi-paragraph, review like that, my cup runneth over. I couldn't appreciate it more.
What do you think writing success looks like to you?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There are so many milestones, and I used to think that, and I still do to a certain extent, think that it can come either through good reviews, feedback from readers, uh, or financial success, if it takes off like 50 Shades of Gray or something, or some combination. I think you can have a book that the critics rave about and doesn't sell anything,
Yeah.
and then you could have a book where the critics, it's just panned. And one example that I hear people talk about is from the 60s, the Valley of the Dolls, and that was a runaway hit and made into a movie. And that author, she had several best-selling books, but she was panned by critics. I mean, critics were saying things like, she isn't even writing full sentences, but I'm sure she carried all the way to the bank. So either one of those or a combination. But also, I think, hitting your word count, I can feel very good about that. Or getting a certain number of hours of writing in a week, finishing a manuscript, revising it after you get comments, getting it ready to go, getting line edits back and resolving those, having it come back, having somebody proofread it, and with very few changes, sending it off to the printer, getting it printed, launching it. All of those are huge milestones, and anybody who does it should be very happy. Now, there's always something else, being human, that we want, but I think that just getting it published makes me feel, and putting out what I think is the best possible work product that I could have put out.
I agree. And I think all of those milestones are reasons to celebrate. And I think we should celebrate all along the way.
Yeah, you have to. You have to set little goals for yourself. And if you're not happy, every day you get your word count or get something, a chapter done, or even a paragraph, you're not going to be, because as so much self-doubt creeps in, right? I don't know what I mean. And after a long career, maybe, I don't know which is worse, but after you've had some success in another area and you sit down and you're learning something completely new, and you realize you have no idea what you're doing. And yet you've got this whole other area of your life that you could be focusing on, where you have figured out a few things. And that's a very humbling experience. But you don't grow unless you're outside of your comfort zone.
It's a very humbling industry. And I can only imagine that those very successful New York best-selling authors have severe doubts when they sit down and think, can I replicate my success one more time?
I absolutely. How do I do it again? And I think it's like anything, you really have to focus on the fundamentals. And I'm struggling with my second novel. Oh, am I ever going to get this done? And then when I was looking for this material that I wanted to pull from an earlier draft of Bottle Lightning, I saw all the drafts, listed in the folder, and I realized, how much work had gone into Bottle Lightning and all of the struggles, and so it's just one day at a time.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that this second book is not a part of a series or a sequel. What was your inspiration for it?
I fly fish in the Florida Keys a lot, and it's a very unique place. It's I think the mecca for saltwater fly fishing. It's the pinnacle for technical fly fishing, and but it's changed. The population has increased quite a bit, and I've been fishing tournaments there for the last several years, and it's a little sort of microcosm. It's like Never Land, so to speak. Everybody who goes there gets caught up in the fish and the other anglers and the guides, and there's a season that runs April, May, and June, and you have people fishing from teenagers, maybe even younger, all the way into their 80s, right? And when you're sitting there talking to people about the fishing and about the drama on and off the water, we're all the same. It's sort of age melts away, and I just find that very fascinating. It's really quite a rich place in material, and that's why people like Thomas McGuane and Hyacinth have written about it. But I think there's another story to tell, and that's what I'm working on.
That's great. I love to fish, and I love to take all of my grandchildren, and we have big tournaments among ourselves. So we're all fisher people.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Even a day on the water where I don't catch fish, I'm never sorry I went.
No.
Better than a good day in the office.
You're right about that. Well, Mark, as always, our very last interview question is, our writers over 50 are quite unique. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
Just do it is what I would say. You've lived a life that's obviously rich in experience, and so just it's butts in chair and don't worry about the self-doubt. Just push through and do it. I would say this: one of the best pieces of advice I've heard is don't self-edit on the first draft. Just get it all out there. Even if you think something sucks, or you think something's inappropriate, or you think it's too violent, or too over the top for whatever reason, put it down on paper, and you can always edit it later. But if you don't get it on paper, you're not going to be able to edit it. I was talking to I had the good fortune of fishing with Tom McGuane recently, who's I think 83 now, and there's a podcast out called the Millhouse Podcast where they interviewed him for 2 hours. It's quite interesting, and any author I recommend should watch it. But he said that first draft is like you're getting ready to build a house. You're pulling the lumber together. You're bringing in the concrete. You're bringing in the roofing tiles. You're getting all that stuff ready. You get it there on the property, and then you start building a nice, beautiful house. And I really like that. It gives you a lot of freedom to suck. Just put it out there.
I think that's great advice, and we appreciate your time so much today and sharing your experiences. And we're happy to say that you're now one of our authors over 50.
Thank you, Julie. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday, when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend, and check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's DAILY, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing, and remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.